Welcome back, Sebastian here. So today I'm going to be doing my review for the 2025 Miami Grand Prix. Last of our flyaway races before we get to the European leg of the season. So let's get right into this preview. So first, taking a look at your track layout. So 19 corners total, 3 DRS zones, 1 going down the main straight, second in the second sector going into turn 11, and then a final one going down kind of the other back straight. Going into turn 17. For the track layout, turn 1, mostly medium to high speed corners, a lot of sweeping corners there. We've had quite a few crashes there over the years, especially in qualifying. Second sector, basically one kind of kinky straight, with the end of the sector being a bunch of really slow corners, with that turn 11 being a pretty prime overtaking spot, and including that really troublesome, tricky final chicane. Followed up by that left-hander and a long straight, which starts sector 3, followed by the really slow corner following that straight, with a couple more fast corners going back to the checkered flag. Relatively flat track. It's basically built around a parking lot around the Miami Dolphins football stadium. So not the most exciting layout, especially for the drivers, but the reality is I think for modern F1, it is a layout that can produce pretty good racing. Now, track 5.412 kilometers, and we're expected to have 57 laps on Sunday. Your race lap record is a 129.708 set by Max Verstappen in 2023. The average speed of that lap is 217 kilometers an hour, which ranks 14th of the 24 tracks on this year's calendar. In terms of downforce rating, from 0 being low downforce and 1 being high downforce, it comes out in my calculations as a 0.53, so right in the middle, which suggests that this will also be a track that really favors aerodynamic efficiency, being able to have relatively low drag on the straights, but able to maintain a good enough amount of downforce in the corners. Full throttle, 58% of the lap, which is relatively low. And again, based on my calculations, corner tendency is tending towards slow corners. So more slow corners here than fast ones. Now, in terms of pole conversion rate, interestingly, it's 0%. We've only had 3 races here, so again, very small sample size, along with a couple of the other stats here. But again, interesting to note that it does suggest that one, getting pole position isn't an automatic guarantee of winning. And I mean, Verstappen won this race from, I believe, 10th on the grid in 2023. So again, it does kind of show that overtaking is pretty possible around here. Now, for rookies, their overtaking out-qualifying percentage is 33%, which ranks 12th. Again, really small sample size, and this is a track that's not on the junior categories, although F1 Academy will be there, although, again, realistically, none of those drivers will get to F1. So again, for the drivers who, go through Formula 3, Formula 2, this is not a track that's on the calendar, so again, a little bit of a disadvantage for them, and this being a sprint weekend also does not help things there. Safety car probability 67%, so again, 2 out of 3 races, very limited, and of course, our first race here was only a couple years ago in 2022. Tires for this weekend, on the softer side of the Pirelli range, soft C5, medium C4, and hard C3. For your weekend schedule, like I said, sprint weekend, and it looks like we might have some variable weather conditions this weekend. So for Friday, FP1 12:30 p.m. local time, and sprint qualifying 4:30 in the afternoon, with the weather for sprint qualifying expected to be 28 degrees and sunny. Moving on to Saturday, sprint will be at noon local time, followed up by qualifying at 4 p.m., with temperature for qualifying expected to be 29 degrees and sunny. Then for the Grand Prix, this is where things can be a little bit dicey. So based on what I've looked at for the weather, I believe I looked at it a couple hours ago, expectation for the Grand Prix is 28 degrees with a 45% chance of rain. It looks like as you go through the late afternoon into the evening, it looks like the the percentage of basically the probability of precipitation increases. So again, will be interesting to see how that affects the race. From what I've read online, it seems like Florida weather is very unpredictable. So we could have rain before the race, and then it being a wet dry race, or it could be a dry race that becomes wet, or who knows what it'll turn out to be. So again, very unpredictable, and who knows, we might not have any rain at all. Now, for your 2024 race, taking a look back at last year, this was, of course, Lando Norris's maiden F1 win. Joining him on the podium was Max Verstappen and Charles Leclerc. So, taking a look at some of the big moments from that weekend. So again, this was also a sprint weekend last year, but in the sprint, fairly big crash at the start involving both Astons, Alonso, Stroll, as well as Norris and Hamilton as well. So a bit of a big crash in the sprint, and of course, it was a very good result for Daniel Ricciardo, who finished in fourth, and that looked like it was his form was just finally turning around, and he would be back to the Ricciardo of 2020. Unfortunately, things did not really continue from there, and things, kind of petered out, especially towards the end there. But that was definitely kind of a high mark of Ricciardo's season. In the main Grand Prix, of course, we had the very, very close moment between Verstappen and Perez at the start, with Perez almost taking his teammate out, locking up into the first corner. And of course, we saw Max Verstappen's reaction to that in the cool-down room, and that got, posted everywhere all over the internet. Now, of course, the big moment from the Grand Prix itself was the clash between Kevin Magnussen and Logan Sargent. Magnussen being a bit too aggressive, something that was definitely, a feature rather than a bug last year, and taking the two of them out. And this, of course, deployed the safety car. But of course, this safety car kind of came out in the middle of the pit window. So a bunch of the leaders, Verstappen, for example, had already pitted, but Lando Norris, opportunistically going very long on that first stint, had not yet pitted, pits under the safety car, and comes out back in the lead when that safety car came back in. Now, I think for many, the expectation was that Verstappen would easily overtake Leclerc and go on to win the race, as he had done for pretty much every race for the last year or so. But wouldn't be the case. Verstappen, a bit of floor damage going over the curb at that tricky chicane at the end of Sector 2. Norris was able to just kind of pull away from him, and cruised home to take his maiden F1 win. Very, very well deserved, I thought, on that day. Now, taking a look at, before we get into predictions for this weekend, I'm going to take a look at best qualifiers and worst qualifiers as always. And this, of course, is in relation to each driver's career out-qualifying percentage. So a bit of a surprise here, which is why I have to give the preface, and that is Lance Stroll. So plus 43%. He's actually out-qualified his teammates 2 of the 3 years he's raced here, which is why it's much better than his career average, with his median qualifying gap being about 0.2 of a second in his favor. Number 2, Pierre Gasly, plus 37%, median qualifying gap of 1.5 in his favor. And number 3 is Alex Albon, plus 33%, 1.8 in his favor. Now, for the worst qualifiers, a couple of interesting names on this list. Carlos Sainz, negative 13%, median qualifying gap of 0.07 of a second, so very, very close gap there. Number 2 is Yuki Tsunoda, 17%. So again, that doesn't bode particularly well for this weekend, with a median qualifying gap of about 0.1 of a second. And then worst is, unfortunately, Lewis Hamilton, negative 30%, with an out-qualifying margin of for being basically 0.04 of a second against him. Now, taking a look at qualifying model predictions for this weekend, your 10 drivers predicted to out-qualify their opponents are as follows. Piastri, Leclerc, Verstappen, Russell, Alonso, Gasly, Ocon, Lawson, Albon, and Hülkenberg. But please note, for Ocon, Lawson, and Hülkenberg, the drivers with a star, they do not have enough data basically at the Miami track. They've raced done less than 3 qualifying sessions there, and their teammates haven't done three sessions either. So I'm basically just not using the track, basically any modifications for the track itself. Now, taking a look at predictions for this weekend, I think McLaren 1-2 is a pretty safe bet, assuming one of the McLarens doesn't just screw things up. But again, that's something that's, unfortunately for them, has happened more often than I think they would have liked. But nonetheless, that's kind of the default going into the weekend. And given the run of form that he's been on recently, I am going to predict Piastri in front of Norris. Now, for final spot on the podium, this is a bit of a tricky one. Last race, I predicted Russell. Turns out that Mercedes had a pretty bad weekend. Verstappen much stronger than expected. So again, I think Verstappen could be an interesting bet here, but there are quite a bit more slow corners at the Miami circuit, and that's something that they really struggled with in Bahrain. So I'm not sure if picking either of them or Ferrari, who again also not particularly great in slow speed corners, would be a particularly astute prediction to make. So I'm going to be pretty boring and do this exact same prediction I did last time, and that is to predict George Russell on the podium in third. So there you go. There's my preview for the 2025 Miami Grand Prix. Should be an interesting race. Hopefully the racing's good. I know, the track itself is pretty terrible. It's up there with, Sochi and Valencia as being awful in terms of just an eyesore and drivability, I would say, in terms of enjoying the enjoyment of driving it. But still, the racing there is not terrible. So again, that's one thing that I think we can all look forward to. So again, thank you so much for watching, and goodbye.